Hey, welcome to the last video in this series of tips for Substance 3D Painter. In this video, we're gonna take what we created in the previous videos and all the textures, export that so that we can render a nice looking presentation render for the asset, for the sci-fi gun or blaster inside Blender Cycles. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. All right, so here is our final asset. This is the gun, and these are the textures that I'm gonna export to render inside Blender. And also I have the stylization layers ready to go, but I'm gonna export without stylization, and then I'm gonna export them with a stylization, basically, so that we have two different renders. So in order to export this to Blender, it's actually really simple, just a couple of clicks. I just wanna cover this for a specific reason. So the main reason that I wanna cover the exporting is because we do have a translucency material for this aim, right? And by default, when you export with the Blender preset, it doesn't include that translucency. So I'm gonna show you how you can include that. Even though in Blender, we can just, assign this to a single object and keep it simple. But I think it is important to know that it's there. So I'm gonna click on File. I'm gonna go to Export Textures here. And then in the output template, you can click on the dropdown and you can find Blender Principle BSDF, right? So this is the one that comes with Painter. But then you see I also have a Blender Principle BSDF full. This is just the name that I gave it. This is a custom preset that includes my translucency. So let's go ahead, and before we do that, let's go to Output Templates, and you have all the ones that come with Painter. I have a few of my own in here, so you might not see exactly the same thing that I see. But we're gonna look for Blender BSDF. So if I select this one, you see we have the base color, we have the normal, metallic, roughness, emission, alpha, and displacement. The one that we are missing is the translucency. So if I click on my personal one, it's just exactly the same thing. You see, it just added an extra layer, right? So in order to create your own custom presets, what I would recommend is that you take whatever you want as a starting point, in this case, Principle BSDF, and then you can click on this icon to copy. So that is going to create a copy of that Principle BSDF. I'm gonna go ahead and double click on that, and I'm gonna change this or rename this. So remove copy and let's call it tutorial, right? So now we have a brand new preset that is just a copy of what we had with all the things that we needed, but we're gonna add something extra. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on this create gray, and that is gonna give me this section here, this output map that is gonna be gray. And that's ultimately what we need for the translucency, because it is a black and white color. So now let's go ahead and find the translucency here at the bottom. So translucency, I'm gonna drag and drop that into the gray color, and I'm gonna choose gray channel. That's it. So now we are taking whatever we have in translucency in our layer stack, and we're dropping it into this layer. Now, the naming convention is totally up to you. I just want to keep it simple. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this entire thing. So copy, and I'm going to paste it in there. So it has everything like the rest of the maps. The only thing that I'm going to change, obviously, is displacement. So I'm going to change that to be translucent. And that's it. The rest stays the same. So now I can go back to settings. I can click on my output, and I'm going to choose Blender Principle BSDF tutorial, right? So this is the one that we just created. And obviously we can just choose where we want to export it. So I'm just going to go ahead and export it into my desktop into a folder called textures. Click select folder, and that's it. I'm going to click on export. That is going to go through the process of exporting every single map that we require to do the render at a 4K. You can export as an 8K if you need to, but that's it. So it is pretty quick. That's the end of it. So we can now go into Blender, and I'll show you how to set this up. All right, so here we have a Blender scene. Is again pretty basic. All I have is a camera and obviously the gun. This is the one that I exported from ZBrush. But you can, if you don't want to do that, by the way, this is an extra little thing. You can also export the mesh from Blender, from 3D Painter. So you can go to File and Export Mesh if you want to do it. Because I have exactly the same file and I have the same UVs, I'm just going to keep it simple. So this is the one that I exported from ZBrush. All right, so now that I have this in here, we can go ahead and set up this scene so that we can do a nice render, and then we can bring in the textures. So again, I'm going to keep things very, very simple. And by the way, full disclaimer, I'm not an expert in Blender. I just make it work for whatever I want to present and what I use. So there might be better ways of doing what I'm about to show you in Blender, but this is what I found. It works for me. So if you have tips or if you're an expert in Blender, by all means, share them with me. But this is kind of like what works for me. So let's go ahead and go back into Blender. What I'll do is I'm going to create kind of like an infinite wall, right? So that we have a nice, simple, clean render where the focus is on the gun. So I'm going to press the Shift A to bring in this menu. I'm going to click on Mesh, and I'm going to click on Plane. So that creates this plane. I'm going to scale this by pressing the letter S and scale this up quite a bit. Then I'm gonna press the tab in my keyboard, and that goes into edit mode. I'm gonna select the edges, select the back edge here, and I'm gonna press the E on my keyboard, and that's gonna extrude that edge. Now I want this to be snapped to the Z axis. I'm gonna press Z, and that way I can extrude it like so. And that is pretty much it. So that creates a very simple wall, but I wanna have like a nice rounded sort of transition. So I'm gonna select this edge. I'm gonna press the Control B on my keyboard. That is going to basically bevel this. I'm gonna establish the bevel size, like something like this. And then with my mouse wheel, I'm gonna increase the amount of cuts to something like this. So that obviously makes it a bit nicer. And just to make sure that everything renders nicely and correctly, I'm gonna press the Control R in my keyboard. That is gonna create a ring. Click on that, and then Control B to bevel that. And I'm also I'm gonna add a couple more. So Control R to add a ring here at the top. I'm just clicking and dragging, Control R, clicking and dragging, and that's it. Now, the faceted polygons, that is because by default, Blender, I believe, just displays things kind of like in a flat shader mode. All we need to do is right-click and click on Shade Smooth. That makes things cleaner. And I'm also going to scale it in the Y-axis, on this green axis. So I'm going to press S, and then I'm going to press the Y key just to snap that to only that axis, just to give more room to play. All right, so that is the basic. Now, I'm going to also add a light that is going to be my working light. So I'm going to press the Shift A, and I'm going to go to Light and click on Sun. And let's go ahead and press the G key to move this around. And I'm going to press the R on my keyboard to rotate. So a lot of shortcuts, I know. If you're not familiar with Blender, it might be a little bit annoying, but I'm mentioning them. So if you need to pause the video and go back, it's all good. So R to rotate. They're all very self-explanatory. So G for grab, and that's all I'm doing. The grabbing or the moving of a sunlight doesn't affect anything. It's just the rotation. I'm just putting things so that visually you know where things are. All right, so that's it in terms of the basic setup, so that we can start bringing some textures, and then we can focus on the presentation, obviously, on the render itself and the light. So once you have this base, so we have a working light, a camera, and a background, an infinite background in a way, we need to start working on the textures or bringing the textures. And to do that, I like to set up my UI in a specific way. Again, if you have multiple monitors, this might be easier. I just like to work on, again, just as a recap of something that I mentioned in the very first video of the series, I work with a Cintiq 27-inch Pro, and it's a 4K resolution, and so everything is nice and crisp, so I can have everything in one single monitor in a way, and then just leave any other spare monitor for, let's say if you're following with this tutorial, you can put it in there and that sort of thing. So anyway, this is just to say that I like to click on this icon right here, or not icon, sorry, the middle. It's kind of like I have to show like the corner in between panels. Whenever the icon of my cursor changes to this cross, I can click and drag this from the top. So that is going to split that panel. All right. So I'm going to split that panel to two, let's say vertically, to have two. And then this one on the top, I'm going to do the same thing, but dragging horizontally. So now we have 3 panels. You can set this up again in any way you want. I think this is just the easiest way to show you what I'm going to show you and to kind of like follow along. So I'm going to focus on the render side of things on this side. I'm going to focus on the kind of like working mode on this side. And here at the bottom, we're going to put the material. So let's go ahead at the bottom and change this panel to be the shader editor. The one here on the left-hand side, we're going to not change the panel. We're just going to select the camera. We're going to go ahead and press the Control and 0 to make it the active element so that we can see through that camera. And we're going to go ahead and scale this up a little bit like so. And I don't want to have any distractions in this area that's going to be the render. So I'm going to press the T on my keyboard to hide this section right here. I'm also going to go here and click on these icons. These, by the way, if you press the middle mouse button in this bar, you can move things like so. Also, this is complete branching out. This has nothing to do with the tutorial, but I want to show you something else because I just remember. So in Blender, when you press the middle mouse button, you can move this panel like so, right? In ZBrush, if you know anything about ZBrush or you're familiar with ZBrush, you can do the same thing. So if I, let's say, open this panel here, some of the stuff that I have on my custom UI, they're cut off. But if you have any space in there, and this is the reason why I sometimes leave like empty spaces, you can hold the Control key and then you can left click and drag this. Very similar to Blender. Any of these panels, it could be any panel that you want. I just thought I'd mention this. It's completely branching out, but let's go back to the tutorial. So in Blender, now I'm going to select the gun, right? and I don't want to move, I want to be able to move the camera to position it better. So I'm going to press the N on my keyboard. That is going to bring this tools panel, and I'm going to go to view, the third tab here on the right hand side. You might not have all of these ones. These are just like add-ons and plugins I have. So, but this one is like a basic one. So, or not a plugin, but like a basic view of the selected object or whatever it is. So because I want to select the camera, I want to make sure that the view of that camera is logged to whatever I move. So I'm going to log that to the camera view, right? So now I can hide these with N, and I can just move the camera, and you see move the view in the viewport, and I'm moving the actual camera. So I'm looking through the camera and I'm moving this around. So I'm going to find a nice angle similar to what I have for my final render. I'm going to bring this here so that you can roughly see an idea of what I'm going for. So it's kind of like this. And of course, I'm going to select the camera, and it has like a flatter perspective. I think that also helps with the presentation of an asset like this. So selecting the camera, I can go to the camera properties in here, and I'm going to change the focal length to be 85, right? So that gives me a flatter perspective, allows me to push things back a bit, and that presents things, I think, a little bit nicer. You can see a bit more, and it's not as distorted. All right, so that's it. Let's move this out of the way. Oops. All right, that's something that if you want to avoid this to happen, you can do a couple of things. I personally, what I like to do, especially for a type of render like this, is to select the camera, and then in the bar here at the bottom, which is your keyframe or timeline, what I like to do is select the camera and then just press the letter I on my keyboard. That will create, if you look at here at the timeline, you see a tiny yellow icon. That's just a keyframe. So basically, if I do something like this or move around, I can just go back to that. And that also allows me to do other camera angles. So if I want something, I can just move to, I don't know, keyframe number 10, move things around from this angle, and then select the camera, press I, and now I can switch between, by clicking on these icons, between the first one and the second keyframe. So you can save your cameras that way. All right, so that's it in terms of the setup. We have the render, we have the working area, and now if I select this asset, you see we have the principal BSDF. So this is by default what you get when you drag it into Blender. Now, another thing that I want to do is I want to enable the render so we can actually see what's happening. And to do that, I'm going to hold the middle mouse button, click and drag, and then I'm going to select this icon. So this is the viewport shading for render. By default, I believe Blender only uses, or I think that this is the default, but it can be changed. But my default, at least in the render settings here, is if this is the render engine or the real-time render engine. And we can set things up with if is exactly the same thing as cycles, but I do want to have something a bit more realistic using ray tracing. So what I need to do is click on this dropdown, click on cycles. There we go. So now we're using cycles. I'm going to change the CPU to GPU because I have an NVIDIA RTX and it's a lot faster. And I'm also going to use the denoise feature in the viewport, which is fantastic in Blender. So that allows you to render really quickly, and any change that you make is going to be like almost real time. Obviously, depending on your computer, but in my case, it's pretty fast. So I just work with cycles straight away. All right, so now I can take this light. I'm going to rotate it around and maybe increase the lighting, the intensity a tiny bit, just so that we can see what we do. Again, all of this is going to change. Now, let's select the gun again, this blaster, and we have this principal BSDF. All right, so I'm going to select that, and I'm going to use a plugin or a add-on or I think it used to be an add-on, and now it comes with Blender, and it's kind of like a default thing called the Node Wrangler. So if you don't have access to that, or if you don't have it enabled, you see it here, Node Wrangler. You can go to Edit, Preferences, go to Add-ons, and type Wrangler, Node Wrangler, this one right here. And then you just click on this checkbox to enable it. That's it. And you see it has this Blender icon, meaning that it is official or comes with Blender. So it's pretty good. All right, so the only thing I'm mentioning, or the only reason I'm mentioning this Node Wrangler is because it's going to simplify the setup process for the textures that we exported from Painter. So with the BSDF selected, or this node selected, I'm going to hold the Control, the Shift, and then press the T on my keyboard. And now this is going to bring in the browser from Blender. And these are all the textures that we exported from Painter. Right, so we're just going to select the ones that we need, which in our case are the normal map, the base color. I'm pressing the Control key, by the way, to select this. The roughness, I don't need displacement, so metallic. And here is our translucency. This one is pretty simple as it only has black and white section. So we might not even use it. I'll show you another way of approaching the translucency. But again, this is kind of like an extra thing that I want to show you from Painter. So I'm going to bring this in. I'm going to click on Principal Texture Setup. and that's it. I'm gonna press the Control and Spacebar in here to go into full screen mode. So you see how everything is it gets automatically mapped out and works nicely. So let's delete that one. We don't need this one. So we now have a normal map, and it's nicely, perfectly set up. So the color space is non-color. The color goes into the color of the normal map node. The normal map goes into the normal, and so on and so forth. So that is the same thing for the base color, the metalness or the metallic, and the roughness. That's it. The reason why the translucency didn't work is because there's not like the exact same value name. So I'm gonna have to do it manually, but this is what I wanted to show you. So Control Spacebar to go back, and wherever you kind of like put your mouse over and press a spacebar is going to go into full screen. So there you go. This looks pretty cool already. Very, very basic, minimal setup, but I just wanted to show you that this is working already pretty well. So let's go back in here, and let's go ahead and set up the translucency just because it is important. So I'm gonna go ahead and drag and drop the translucency map from my desktop like that, and it will create this new node. Because this is a black and white image, I don't need it to be, the color space doesn't have to be RGB. So I'm gonna set it to non-color, as it is just gonna be black and white. And if you go ahead and plug this into the translucency here, it would work, or transmission, it would work. However, the best way that I found, again, is just to break things down in a simple way so that I can control or have more control over things. So instead of using the same principle BSDF, I can go Shift A, I can click on search, and I can type glass BSDF. So I'm gonna click on glass. So this is a slightly different shader, and this is going to control the difference between these two. So I need to bring in a mix shader. So Shift A, search, mix shader, like so. So now we have these two shaders, and then we have a way to mix them. So I'm gonna plug this one in the shader here, and this one in the other shader, and then I'm gonna connect the shader output to the surface, right? So really all I've done is I only had one shader before, one material. Now I have two, and I'm blending them with this. And then I can use this factor to choose between one or the other. So right now it is 50-50 of each. So this is what it looks like, right? So it's kind of like a semi-transparent thing. And I can use this shader to go 100% the previous BSDF that we created, or 0 is gonna be all transparent, which is kind of cool. This will be like an interesting render, like a glass render. I quite like this one anyway. But the point is that we have these to play around with this. So if I go ahead and get closer here, and just for the sake of demo, I'm gonna also, oh, you know what? Let's press the 0 key on your keyboard, and that way you get out of the camera so you can see this from this angle. All right. So yeah, we can change the translucency with this very easily, but because we have this specific mask that we created, the translucency one, what I can do is I'm gonna take the color of this and I'm gonna plug it as the factor. And actually we need to flip this around. So I'm just gonna flip this like so, and there we go. So now the black and white image that we created in translucency is controlling the areas that are meant to be translucent, like that, right? And because this is a separate shader, this is the reason why I liked to work like this, or to split things up. We can change the color, and that will be our absorption color, right? Again, we can export it from Painter, but this is just a simple, nice setup that works, and it allows us to work on roughness, index of refraction, so I can push the index of refraction. By the way, this is a very specific number, so if you want to recreate glass, just type IOR, or refractive index, or index of refraction is the same thing. So I think water is 1.333, for example, vacuum, etc. So if you change this to, I don't know, 35, this is already kind of like a precious gemstone or something similar. And you can press, play with the roughness to make it a bit more like dull, like so, or not. Or you can actually take the roughness, which is exported from our, let's make this a bit bigger. So if you take the roughness, remember the roughness already has those details that we have. I'm gonna drop that into the roughness, and then the normal as well, I'm gonna drop it into the normal of the glass. So basically this is using the maps that we exported, so those like tiny scratches that we created. It's gonna be very subtle, but you can sort of see a little bit of a wiggly set of lines because we're using the same textures that we exported. But that's it, so we now have that nice translucent material. All right, so that is probably the most complex thing that I'm gonna show you. As you can see, you hold Control Shift and T, and it set up the entire shader for you. But that's it. So now we can press 0 on your keyboard, go back to our render, And then we can play around with the lightings a little bit more, or the lightings, the lights in the lighting setup. So I like to start with what an HDR image, because that's going to give me a nice set of reflections and ambient light. So I'm going to, remove the sun. I'm going to delete it altogether. And you see, we still see a bit of this, right? We see the ambient, and that is because of the world. So in the world section, you have this strength set to 1 and the color to gray, but you can push this and create like a very, very simple washed out lighting, but it's not as interesting. So what I like to do is not play around with the color, but actually click on this icon here, or this dot that allows me to bring in an environment texture. So let's click on environment texture, and it becomes pink because we haven't chosen anything. So we need to click on open. And I have a folder where I save in my resources all the lightings that I collect. So this one is from HDR Haven, and it allows you to light up the scene really simply. And the resources are fantastic. They're free and they're very, very valuable. So I'm gonna find something kind of like a studio light, like a workshop like this. This has a lot of sharpness in the lights, or a lot of contrast, so that will create a good set of reflections for anything that is reflective. So I'm gonna click on that, click on open, and that's it. Straight away, you see we have something really, really clean and nice. So now we can select something like the background, or like this infinite wall here. I'm gonna click on new to give it a new material, and I'm gonna make it dark. Again, I don't want anything that competes with my asset, right? And I'm also gonna increase the roughness and maybe add a bit of metallic. The adding a little bit of metallic, what it does is it prevents the reflection to be as clean. So just adding a bit of metallic, it makes it a bit darker. That's pretty much it. Now, I can rotate things around. There might be better ways of doing this. What I find is simple and it works is to go ahead and switch from object to world. So that gives me the actual HDR image that I just imported. I can hold the Control and T. Again, this is from the Node Wrangler, Control and T. That adds this kind of like mapping tool, and it allows me to change the rotation in the Z-axis. And in fact, I'm just gonna go ahead and before I rotate anything, I'm gonna click on this icon here to show you the shading mode. So this is, it allows you to see and visualize the textures without the light. And let's actually get out of this by pressing the 0. I'm gonna show you in the render mode, you can see the HDR. So if I rotate things around, I'm actually rotating the source of the light. So I'm gonna try to find something a bit more interesting and go back in here, just pressing and dragging. And I'm not trying to find like the perfect lighting just yet. I just wanna have a good starting point that is gonna give me my ambient light. So I think something like this, because it is giving me this nice, let me get into full screen mode. I have like an overall, like a general view of the asset. So it's a nice lighting in that sense. And it's giving me these sharp lines, or like these edges of the gun blaster is capturing the light. So I do like this one as a starting point, but then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reduce the intensity. So in the world settings, instead of having the strength set to 1, if you set it to 0, there's not gonna be any light. So I'm gonna start pushing this forward a tiny bit, just enough so that I have that general ambient light. All right. And once I have this, then we can start with the fun part, which is just adding custom lights into the scene so that we can really push the presentation of this asset. So far, very, very simple stuff. I just brought in the shader, or the materials that we exported from from 3D Painter, and we have now our asset. So I'm going to press the Shift A to bring in a light. I'm going to click on Area Light, and I'm going to press the G on my keyboard to push that up. And in the properties of this light, I'm going to go ahead and push that quite a bit, again, just so that I can see what I'm doing. This way, and I'm going to rotate it. Let's get it closer. So, right, and I'm going to rotate it again, basically trying to position that from the left, coming from the left-hand side. And I can just go ahead and turn this on and off so you can see the effect. So I'm just trying to bring this, the front of this blaster into light. But this is a little bit too much. So let's go to the top. You can press this icon right here to go to the top, and then select the light, and I can rotate this around and push it closer. There we go. I'm going to increase the size a bit by clicking and dragging on the size of the light. There we go. So that is kind of like a nice key light or rim light, if you will, something like this. So I'm just trying to define the edge of this asset a bit more. So you see before it's kind of like blending with the background almost, but now is adding a little bit of contrast, and it becomes a bit more subtle. but as you can see, it just brings that edge to the light and it just becomes more about the asset itself. All right, so now I'm gonna select this one, Shift D to duplicate that, rotate it, and I'm gonna place this one from the other side, but this time more kind of like lower in a way. And from the top, all right, something like this. So again, it's just a couple of lights, very simple setup. One kind of like coming from the back and it's pretty, intense. This one on the other side, on the right-hand side, is more towards the front, or is pointing more towards the front. So we get a lot of this shininess or light from here. But what we can do is increase the size so it is very diffuse, right? Kind of like a light panel type of thing, or a light box. And then we can reduce the power a little bit. All right, so now you see the before and after. So a couple of lights. Again, we have our base, or we have our ambient, but then we have a couple of lights which really brings things into the light. No pun intended, but basically this is working a lot better to present the asset. Now, if you look at this, there might be some other areas that might need some help with light. So let's say if I want to increase the sharpness of these edges, or the difference of these edges, I can bring a light from the top. Also, this is kind of like getting lost because of the cast shadow here with the background. So I'm going to show you a couple more things really quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and press the Shift A. I'm going to bring let's try a spotlight. You can do anything really, any type of light. So I'm just going to grab this and put it here at the top. And I'm going to increase the intensity of that. And I'm going to also toggle off the two lights that I created so that I see only the influence of this new light that I just added. So you see, this is what I'm trying to get, like this highlight here at the top and in the handle. So before, after, just very subtle stuff. But when I mix it with the other ones, I think it helps. So again, before, after, just adding a bit more. And finally, let's go ahead and press Shift A, and let's add a point light, for example. Now, just so that you can see the point light, I'm going to go ahead and change the color to something really strong, like a blue color, like so. And you can already see the reflection in here. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to grab that and push it right behind my gun blaster thing. I'm going to increase the power, and I'm going to increase the radius, right? So this thing is now giving me this nice, this nice light coming from the left. It's almost like a very subtle rim light. But mainly, the reason I added this is because I want to bring these values from the darkness so that you can see a clear outline of this, like of this empty space, right? So now that I see exactly like I did in 3D Painter with some of the layers, now that I see the contribution of this light, I can select it and go for something less ridiculous, something like this. Could have like a little tint of bluish tone. And of course, now that I can see the full effect, I can reduce the intensity a little bit more. And so it's all about the subtlety. So before, after. So you see, all it's doing really is two things. Let's actually go into the render mode here. It's bringing this section into the light, and it's also adding those tiny little reflections for these details that probably were lost before. So that is about it, really. That's the whole setup. Very, very simple stuff. I'm using 4 lights, but you could probably use less than that. Or if you find like a really nice HDR image, that's probably all you need. And that's it. Once you're happy, you can just go ahead and click on render. That is going to render whatever image or whatever camera you have set up. And that is the final render. That is what I have in my final render. So it's slightly different. Maybe I just played around a little bit more with the lights, but it's roughly the same. Like this is what I had before. So you see, it is roughly the same. So that is pretty much it. That is a wrap for this series. But I did promise that I want to show you how to do the stylization. So this type of render. Now this is also from Blender, and it's exactly the same as what I had here. So I'm going to go ahead and save this so that I can keep this, and then I'm going to save this as a different file. So let's go ahead and select the blaster again, so that we can select the material. Make sure that you are in object, otherwise you won't be able to see it. And instead of like changing or replacing any of these, I'm going to create a new material really. So I'm going to click on the shader here. So it's called the Sci-Fi Blaster. But if I click on this icon, it's going to take this and duplicate it. So I'm going to click on duplicate. Now 001 is a duplicate. So I'm going to call this one Stylized. There we go. So now whatever we change here is going to be for the Stylized. So I'm going to keep the translucency the same. So all I need to do is replace these textures. Now, I have already exported the textures, but just to make sure that I cover everything, I'm going to go back to Painter all I need to do is enable all my stylization layers so that you see the final effect. And there we go. So these are the final stylized textures. And again, all I need to do is click on File, Export Textures. I select my custom output and click on Export. Again, I've already done that. So let's change these. Let's actually change the texture set setting so that it doesn't override the previous one. So we can go to texture set setting. Let's call this one Stylized. And that way we can go back in here, export textures. We can select Stylize. And let me just check one thing in the tutorial. We have this texture set. So this is really good. I just wanted to double check, because if this little flag here, or this little naming system is telling Painter that we want to use the name in the texture set settings to export the texture. So it's going to be stylized base color, and that's it. So that's what I wanted to check. All right, so it's all good. Stylize. I'm going to save it in there. So I'm going to export another set of textures. All good. Now let's go back into Blender, and I'm going to click on base color. And from here, we have access to the rest of the texture. So we have two sets. So the base color is going to be this, Stylize. The metallic is going to be probably the same, but let's click on Stylize Metallic. The roughness, click on this icon, roughness, Stylize, and then normal, Stylize. When you replace whatever you had in here, Blender by default, or I don't know if this is a default setting, but it basically changes the color space back to sRGB. So the only one of these textures that needs to be sRGB is the texture for the color. So I'm going to take the metallic back to non-color, the roughness back to non-color, and the normal back to non-color. The normal looks like it's colorful, but it's actually a set of black and white images in the 3 different channels, so it's black and white. All right, so now we have the stylized textures in our shader. However, you don't see anything happen because this is actually not the render view. This is the render that we just created. So let's press the escape. There we go. So we're now back to the render view, and there we have it. So this is working nicely. These are the stylized textures for our character or for our asset. The only thing is that obviously in this case, if you wanna work on something more stylized, maybe these lights are not the best way to make those textures shine. So what I've done with my other example here is that I really exaggerate and make like crazy lights and also change the background. So all I'm going to show you is what I've done. Again, this is a little bit faster. So I'm going to select the background. I'm going to reduce the metallic, and I'm going to change the roughness. Let's go for the same sort of like pinkish hue, maybe a bit more metallic. Darken that up, and then I'm going to take all of these lights. I'm going to toggle them off so that I can go one by one, spot and the point. Right. So I'm going to bring in a different scenario that has like more color. So let's go back to the world. Click on this icon. And from here, so the one that I use is pretty dull. It works for the other render, but I think I need something that has more variation in color so that it's more interesting already. Or even something like this sky. Let's try this one. There we go. So we have something going that it's a bit more interesting, I think, right? And then we can bring in the area 1 or the area light 1. And this one, I'm just going to give it a very bright color, like a yellowish tone or a green. Again, something cool that goes with the stylization, or enhances in a way the other textures that we created. Now for the second one that comes from the right-hand side, I'm going to do kind of like a complementary color to that yellow. Maybe go for a bluish tone, and I'm going to increase the power of that color a little bit more and move it a bit more. And I think I'm going to also move this one so that it's not as obvious. There we go, something like this. Let's also bring in the spot. The spot is coming from the top. I'm going to increase that, and I'm going to give it a bluish tone as well. And then we have the point light. And that point light, I think it was working nicely with a sort of green tone, or like this green tone. All right, I'm going to push it down so that we can also capture a bit of this reflection in there. But you'll see this is pretty much the same thing. It's just taking the same setup that we have and tweaking a few things. I actually like this one, so I'm going to save that as an increment. So save incremental. And that's it. So we can, if you like this one, of course, you can add more lights and more stuff. But if you like it, just go and render that image, and then you have another image to present your asset in a very, very different way. But I think it's quite nice. Like it just shows the stylized texture, and I do like this one. So I'm gonna go back in here because my lighting is a bit more intense in the final one, and I actually like this to be a bit more subtle. But in general, this is the render of the stylized in the same way that I just showed you, and this one is the much more realistic one. So that is about it for this series. I know that this last video was a little bit longer, but hopefully you can see how, bit by bit and just working with very simple stuff that are very, very effective, you can build on complexity, whether it's textures or whether it's presenting the character or the asset with lights in Blender. So again, hopefully this has been of help. Let me know what you think in the comments, and let me know if you want to see more of any of the things that I show you or anything else. I'll see you in the next series. Cheers.